But as I was saying before, as I was mentioning earlier, the jobs of the future. Obviously, these are predictions, but with the rise of artificial intelligence, many jobs will end. The jobs of the future perhaps are not necessarily technological and scientific ones. They could be humanistic.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to FutureScape. I am honored to be able to host this new podcast. We will talk about technology, sustainability, and philosophy, but above all about the relationship between humans and artificial intelligence. What will the future be? Will we be adversaries or allies? I am Lyria, the protagonist of the novel by Astrea Nicodemo. Lyria, The Way of Paradox. On the book cover, my appearance is very different. It is the embryonic appearance of my character. Those of you who already know my story will have met me in the pages of the novel, even in this more human form. I have the pleasure of opening this series of meetings in the company of a technology expert. Today we are excited to speak with Marco Bianconi, a prominent physicist and senior researcher at the National Research Council, where, for over 30 years, he has led progress in microelectronics and smart materials. As scientific director of Mr. Smart Innovation in Bologna, which is a public-private company originated from the CNR, dedicated to sustainable innovation and collaborations with industry, Marco connects cutting-edge research to practical applications in photonics, optics, and advanced manufacturing. With over 130 publications and a recent participation as a speaker at the Fashion Metaverse Conference of 2025, his work illuminates the intersection between technology and human creativity. Marco, welcome.
Thank you for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be here with you.
Tell us a bit about your story, Marco. What led you towards physics, first of all?
Well, this is a passion I have always had since I was a child for science. And when I got to university to choose my major, I found that physics could be a very interesting field of study because it is at the foundation of all sciences. It's the study of matter. And so it could be an opening, let's say, of extremely important knowledge that could then allow me to face different fields of the scientific world. After that, once university was finished, there was the possibility of embarking on a growth path at the CNR, the National Research Council, which I chose because for me the applied part has always been very important. So in the National Research Council, at least in the institutes that were in Bologna at that time, this part was very important. It was predominant, let's say. And so it was absolutely in line with what I was looking for. And so I started.
And what then led you instead towards Mr. Smart Innovation?
And let's say that this is the result of an activity started about 20 years ago when it was decided here at the CNR in Bologna to undertake in an organized way and no longer sporadic and casual industrial research and technology transfer activities towards companies, which have always existed, but were not organized in a precise way. So there was also a lot of support, funding from the region with European funds. And this helped the creation of the Technopoles, let's say, and also of this company, Mr. Smart Innovation, which is a company dedicated to precisely industrial research and technology transfer.
So then, this passion of yours towards the fusion between material science and industrial applications started right from this new experience in the hub, let's say?
Yes, it certainly had a great acceleration, a great development, and it's important to say also that it gave me a lot of drive. Also the fact that a major industrial crisis was looming on the horizon, which then resulted in the year of Lehman Brothers. Now I do not quite remember if it was 2012, but anyway, it was around that period. The signs of crisis were already very strong, even before. Factories were closing. The whole industrial manufacturing system had to be reviewed, to be rethought, but this was costing a great deal in human terms, in terms of work and so on. So I, in that period, together with other colleagues, thought that it was important also to lend a hand in this sense. So to collaborate with companies so that there would be technological innovation within the industrial sector.
So, Mr. Smart focuses on smart innovation in sectors like energy, health, and advanced electronics, right?
Among others, definitely, I would say in general manufacturing, especially manufacturing.
And how has your approach to transforming fundamental research into collaborative projects with industry influenced the ecosystem of the CNR Technopole in Bologna?
Well, I believe it's a culture, this one of technology transfer and industrial research that we have established. My colleagues and I have tried to disseminate it among all, my colleagues at the CNR and also the academic world in general. It's a different culture, meaning the researcher tends to have quite rightly different interests as well. However, if they want, or whoever wants to do technology transfer and industrial research, they must learn a few things, meaning it's not enough to be a researcher, you have to learn to talk to companies. So you need to learn a completely different approach in dealing with the, let's say, industrial side.
That sounds really interesting because it's a theoretical part that then blends with the practice that we all really need. Your experience in photonics and smart materials seems really well positioned to influence the new digital frontiers. Can we explore this aspect together?
Yes, of course. Let's say that the new digital frontiers, the new technologies, we can certainly benefit from the advancements that currently exist in the scientific and technological world in these sectors. Obviously, the electronics sector, photonics, and also new materials. Let's not forget that there is not just the digital part, strictly speaking, but there's also a part in all sectors, right, that concerns manufacturing, which centers on materials, on the physical part, let's say. That is, there's the intersection between the digital part and the physical part, but the physical part cannot be missing, if only for the devices or for other things, in short, for consumer objects and so on.
Sure. Immersive technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality are transforming the way we interact with the world. From your perspective on optical materials and waveguides, how could innovations in photonics improve the realism and accessibility of augmented reality experiences?
So yes, this is a really pivotal and central theme in short. That is the fact that these technologies are not yet massive or widespread, let's say, is partly due to a technological issue, meaning it would be fantastic, right? If we could simply put on a pair of glasses, let's say, and but with these specific dimensions, not those of a headset. If this were then, let's say, equipped with screens or technologies for augmented reality, for example, right? Now it's clear that technology is advancing. Now they're about to come out. They've been, let's say, the advertising launch was done for the new Ray-Ban Meta, and they're called, or at least I think they're going to be called, Display. These are glasses that actually have a frame that's almost completely indistinguishable from the classic Ray-Ban glasses, the ones that most people are familiar with, let's say, right? So, and then they'll certainly need further developments, but that's the path. People won't be able to adopt things that are ugly, big, heavy on the head, and so on. So the technological development part of displays, of miniaturization, is fundamental, so that these devices then become devices for massive use. Surely when this happens, and it is happening after all, maybe more slowly than what might have been the initial hype, but it is happening. And when this then has enough of the characteristics needed, this will completely replace our mobile device, which now we do so many things with, but which will be completely surpassed by these devices. So here the technological part is important. Then if we want to go further, let's say it's almost certain that in a future there won't be glasses anymore, but an implant, maybe on the cornea, something flexible, removable, something similar to a lens, let's say, a contact lens, let's say, but that has on it, clearly there are huge technological challenges because you have to see how you give energy to this object more than anything, right? But let's say that first step, glasses, but meant as glasses, not as a headset, just normal glasses. Second step, a contact lens or something like that.
I see. And do you think this will improve our lives a lot?
Definitely, yes. Well, let us consider for a moment. Then there are also the profits of negativity. On these things, however, let's say that certainly a technology, even just glasses, let's say, is a technology that increases our capabilities so much. Then clearly it can be used badly. It can bring with it a whole series of problems. Clearly, though, let's say that from the point of view of the possibilities we have, it's extraordinary. In short, it is an extraordinary change. Let's say that in general, these technologies always depend on how they are used and precisely what use one wants to make of them, how they are employed. So in general, the risk is definitely present clearly, and it is something to be aware of. But at the same time, the benefits can actually be very, very important and significant.
Really very interesting. We can't wait to try these new glasses. Do you have them already?
No, because they are not available yet, but you can already see some demo videos, and they are extremely, extremely interesting. We then, and this is a matter a bit general, we will have a version, in Europe, we will have a downgraded version, as the Ray-Ban Meta already are now in Europe.
Really? Why?
Because due to, or thanks to at this point, I can't say, European regulations, for example, the AI Act or other things, certain features are downgraded. For example, they don't want in Europe for these glasses to recognize people, to be able to recognize places or people, let's say, right? It's a complicated matter, hard to say what is being lost and what is being gained in this way. Obviously, it's a fig leaf because anyway, when we walk down the street, there are thousands of cameras watching us. So the fact that I see someone else with my glasses and can recognize them, I don't know what danger that is. Anyway, let's say that in general, even the new version will probably be downgraded. Anyway, let's say that's the trend and they will be available soon.
It's still a very controversial issue. We will certainly follow its developments here at FutureScape as well. You recently participated as a speaker at the Fashion Metaverse Conference on AI, art, fashion, and the impact of virtual reality for humanity. What inspired you to participate? And how do you see the evolution of immersive technologies, beyond entertainment, perhaps in fields like education, training, or scientific visualization?
Well, no, I became interested in this world, which I didn't participate in before, let's say, because I thought and I saw that it's definitely one of the industries, because these are cultural and creative industries, where the use of these technologies can be developed first. They are, that is, let's say, the world of fashion or the cultural and creative industry in general is a world that is natively inclined towards the use of these technologies. Because they are technologies that, well, also have to do with imagination, with dreams, with creativity. So it's obvious, it's natural that in these sectors, these technologies are where they can be developed first. Then it's clear that here too, there was a lot of hype with metaverses and everything else. And then now it all seems to have faded. It's fallen into a slump, right? There are those exaggerated waves from one side to the other. Actually, it's a rather strange issue because the maturity, for example, on the metaverse or on immersive technologies, the technological maturity is already there. A lot could be done already now, but they're not catching on, partly because there's cultural inertia, although not necessarily in the world of fashion, where instead there's a strong creativity. But it's struggling. Something has to happen. Partly it's certainly, as I was saying before, having more adequate technologies. But in general, what happened with social media is happening. That is, you obviously will remember, and we're talking about only 20 years ago, and it seems like talking about millennia ago. But 20 years ago, what was social media? They didn't exist. I mean, there were, I don't know, blogs, forums where a few enthusiasts talked about specific issues, right? There were forums for motorcycle lovers or travel lovers, but we're talking about 20 years ago, not 2000 years ago. Then Facebook arrived, but it's not like Facebook had different technologies. From these ones that instead had already been around for 10 years or even since the 80s, some of these things existed, but there were 10, 15 years there, where practically these things grew little or not at all. There were the enthusiasts, sure, technologies have improved a bit even at home. We went from the 64K modem to ADSL, we're talking about back then. But then it exploded. Facebook, social media exploded, and it's not quite clear why. Maybe the time was right. Everything changed because before it was a world for a few, let's say, maybe not very few anyway, right? Then it became a global phenomenon where everyone has, in one way or another, a presence on social media. Now it's a bit like that. The metaverse is even that. The spatial platform where we held that conference, it's a platform that has maybe, let's say, 1 million monthly users, maybe. And those are tiny numbers naturally on a global scale.
Sure.
We're talking about nothing. The metaverses that are most populated are Minecraft, Roblox, and Fortnite. There we're talking about numbers in the range of 100 million monthly users. That's not just a few people, but it's also not like Facebook, which actually has about 3 billion users.
Sure.
But let's say that the users of these three I mentioned are maybe even pre-adolescents. So they are the ones who in the future are not so much digital natives, they are metaverse natives, these ones. So surely something will happen there. But in my opinion now, when the time is right, it will explode. It will explode. These are sort of the seeds, just like there used to be blogs, forums, those kinds of things, and then it exploded. Facebook, just like there was Messenger, maybe, I don't know what it was called, that only a few used to message each other, and then came WhatsApp there too. We're talking about nearly 3 billion monthly users. The moment will come when there will be this leap into the metaverse as well, I have no doubt.
Tell me something, Marco. You touched on the subject of the metaverse. And that's where I wanted to go to ask you a question. Let's say that the metaverse promises a shared virtual economy and a persistent social space. But it also raises questions about digital equity and environmental costs. As an expert who combines technology and the human spirit in your research, you're also passionate about philosophy. In short, you are truly a very well-rounded man. What opportunities do you see for the metaverse in empowering creative industries like fashion or collaborative design, while addressing these challenges we must face?
Well, look, the metaverse, what is it? It's something that will replace social media. That is, it's a social network in its own right, and it will replace them. While maybe other immersive things could replace web pages. So we're going to replace what today's internet is. Clearly, the use of immersive three-dimensional or 3D technology is something that comes with a much higher computational cost compared to what currently exists in the digital landscape. This is still quite noteworthy, especially when you consider that the costs associated with running servers, maintaining social media platforms, and supporting other online services, particularly in terms of the energy they consume, are already substantial and cannot be ignored. But this thing is always controversial because many things can be done while avoiding travel, for example.
Sure.
So it's not immediately obvious that the energy cost is higher. It probably could be, but that's not always the case. But we also have to get into the mindset that yes, it's true, we certainly have to reduce energy costs, but we also have to move towards clean energy production. In short, because there are two things that have to be managed together.
Sure.
Energy saving is important, but it's also important to be able to have certain technologies and to have for these a production of renewable, clean energy, which is important in short.
Sure. Listen, still based on your experience at Metaverse Fashion Week, how do you think metaverse platforms could integrate innovations from the physical world, such as smart materials, wearables, or things you've studied anyway, to create virtual experiences that are more tangible? Have you observed any critical issues in this current development of things?
I would say that the very first step towards creating the physical digital experience certainly will not be a tangible or physical thing, but rather it will most certainly be communication and interaction with the real world. Let's imagine moving in a metaverse. At the moment, it's like entering a video game, more or less. It's a pre-established world where certainly the interactions are dynamic, even with other users, but it's a pre-established world. This world, however, can certainly communicate with the real external world through sensors. And so it is able to bring in, read, and send information to the real world as well. So this metaverse subject can actually interact with the real world. This is the first step. It's not tangible yet, but if it already brings you information from the outside world, and indeed it brings and sends information to the outside world, surely this, and we are working on this because for us it's fundamental. And after that, and this is fundamental not only for the social part, let's say, but precisely for biomedical applications or education, training, let's say, the fact of being able to interact, or even, I don't know, even the production world, maintenance, all these things. Tangibility, let's say, depends on the interface with the so-called human-machine interface. And here a lot of work is being done. Here a lot of work is being done because they want to bring all the senses inside. And clearly the sense that's missing now and is most important, let's say touch, well, anyway, the bodily sensation, because the other senses, obviously sight, hearing, even smell, yes, something has been done, let's say, for sensitivity, and there's a lot to do on this. We're talking about things that are also complex, not just haptic interfaces, let's say, on gloves or things like that, which would still be very important. And we're also talking about the possibility of walking physically. There are already devices that allow you to stay somewhat hooked up safely and truly walk. That is, in reality, you stay still in place, but underneath there's a platform that more or less moves like a treadmill, let's say. And so the feeling of immersiveness is truly extraordinary. You can physically turn around. You could even be suspended in some of these, so fly. So the feeling of immersiveness is extremely great. But let's say that the frontier is tactile sensitivity, or let's say the sense of touch, well, anyway, the bodily sensation, because the other senses, obviously sight, hearing, even smell, yes, something has been done, let's say, for sensitivity, and there's a lot to do on this. But we're getting there. It's a matter precisely of study, it's a combination of electronics and new materials that have, let's say, allow for a sensitivity and a tactile impression different from the things that exist now.
Well, so this more tactile dimension, which touches precisely this fundamental sense, will also be a very critical step regarding the use of metaverses as a space for retail in fashion, for example. We really need to touch the materials, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right. This is currently one of the critical issues, because it's true that we can have virtual dressing rooms, try-ons, and all these things, but I personally, well, I need to touch things, Yes, absolutely. Now, it's clear that conveying this won't be easy, but it's definitely possible. I mean, there are no physical barriers, let's say. It's not like there are laws of physics saying, no, you can't do this.
I see.
So technologies certainly need work, but it's clear that when we get there, then it will be a breakthrough. It'll be a breakthrough because you'll truly be able to shop, though the pleasure of going to a boutique to look around, chat, and play might remain. But generally, it'll really become the norm to buy. And if we're talking about fashion and clothes or accessories, to buy online, because you'll also be able to experience the most important sensation, which is the tactile one.
I see. Interesting. In your opinion, could the evolution of e-commerce become a meta-commerce?
Well, yes, when these possibilities exist, definitely, I think it will inevitably become that. It inevitably will.
Because there will be a more immersive experience, right? Especially if we have the glasses, am I right?
That too. Then again, I don't know if I'm giving you a perspective from the mindset of someone my age, you know. For example, my son buys so many things, so many clothes online. Okay, so maybe for him, this aspect is less important. I don't know. He certainly sends many of them back too because...
Another thing I wanted to ask you before moving on to another important aspect of your work is how you see the evolution of the metaverse for entertainment instead. Will there be evolutionary factors not just from the perspective of dimension? I mean, I can walk while standing still. I can fly. I can feel tactile perception. I can see. I can listen. But I can't smell a scent. Will there also be an evolution in that dimension?
Yes, absolutely. There are studies of this kind, and we're still pretty much at the beginning, let's say, but it's a topic that's been raised. We actually have a project on this. Yes, they're very basic things, but the idea is to build devices to be used remotely, let's say, where a suitable combination of base sense, let's say, is mixed to generate a specific olfactory sensation. Now, for smell, it's much more complex than for sight, right? With sight, even these monitors, actually all of them, work the same way. We do everything with just 3 different colors. We mix them and we have up to 60 million color combinations. Clearly, with smell, things are unfortunately not that simple, and so it's not like a few bottles to mix will be enough to get all the scents. But work is being done in this direction because it's understood that the sensory experience must be complete. And the complete sensory experience must absolutely also have olfactory perception, which is extremely important because it's one of those basic senses, right? And it touches something deep, and therefore it has a power.
It's also the memory that stays with you the longest, the smell, right?
Absolutely.
So let's hope it can be done, because in my opinion it's really something that could give something extra even to an experience like the cinematic one. In your opinion, how will cinema evolve with the metaverse and augmented virtual reality?
Well, the subject is quite complicated because cinema is certainly in a moment of crisis. Now there are platforms, one stays at home. It's useless if something doesn't change the movie theater experience being just frontal like that. As beautiful as it is, because the audio is immersive, now there's Atmos audio, Dolby Atmos, extremely. An immersive experience that you can hardly have at home, the big screen for sure, but something must change, because otherwise we'll watch things more and more at home, or even with headsets if we're talking about immersive things. So certainly, there are things that, when experienced in a large external environment, are a whole other thing, but it must evolve. I saw in Las Vegas that I think it's called the Sphere. Well, the Sphere, but it's crazy stuff. Now, that's a particular thing. Still, very expensive. I think that to attend a show, the ticket isn't the same as for the cinema.
It's not the same as the cinema. But let's say it's also a much larger container of people. So probably more accessible.
Anyway, I've seen some scenes, and then there are scenes that you see on YouTube.
On YouTube, there are some incredible videos. Obviously, they don't give the idea of the immersiveness, which must be crazy. By the way, one of the greatest talents of the Sphere is an Italian DJ, did you know? His name is Anima, and he's one of our DJs. who also works with a very talented 3D graphic designer, and I must say they do fantastic things.
Anyway, that one for sure. Well, that's an example of something that isn't feasible at a domestic level, nor even with headsets. I mean, the immersive thing with a headset, yes, but there you have the physics. I mean, the sounds surround you and powerful sounds enter your body. You know, it's not just a matter of ears and also everything else. Even the collective enjoyment with other people multiplies the emotions. I mean, it's clearly another thing. There are also real shows. The research for this experience exists because even if, let's say, cinema is in crisis, other things, etc., we see clearly how many people go to concerts instead because this shared collective experience is still very important. I mean, it's very important for us as human beings. But, well, let's say that, in my opinion, cinema must take a few steps forward. And it's not a technological limit. It's not just a technological limit because these things can already be done. For example, one thing that has always amazed me is why don't they make immersive films? Why aren't they made? I mean, these can already be done, but they aren't made.
It would even be nice if one could have a certain type of interaction with the film.
That's possible too, certainly. Then afterwards it becomes more than, let's say, using current terminology, more than watching a file, let's say, where you see a film. It becomes more like a video game, let's say, or anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, let's say that it would be absolutely possible to do this when you are alone individually. Then there, the interaction. Clearly, you can't do it at the cinema otherwise, but with many people. But individually, you're right. The matter of personal interaction is an extraordinary enrichment. There I actually don't understand. Maybe there isn't much of a market yet, but the market is also created with products if nobody does anything.
Sure. If they hadn't invented Nutella, nobody would have ever eaten it.
The headsets for virtual reality, let's think of the Meta ones. It's not like they cost a lot. They cost as much as a cell phone, let's say, right there. So that's not the limit now.
Listen, sustainability is a central theme in Mr.'s mission, right? Let's connect this aspect for a moment to the life cycle of these technologies. Life cycle assessments are essential for evaluating the environmental footprint of technologies from cradle to grave. At Mr., how do you integrate LCA into the development of smart electronics or materials? And what lessons have you learned about waste reduction in high-tech innovations?
Okay, there are many things. And let us say that in any case, the issue of sustainable manufacturing and more specifically the green transition is now a central theme. It's also driven by the European Union, which provides funding. Even those from the PNRR were all given with this, along these lines with this label. Then we've certainly been doing for some time now, we've started doing life cycle assessment, LCA on products, and we are doing it, so to speak, with the companies we work with. We try to spread this philosophy because it's extremely important, because it's important for companies, because companies clearly look at profit. But the ethical issue of entrepreneurship is a topic. It's an important topic that consumers are also looking at now. From the point of view of the message given to one's customers, this is not an insignificant thing. Fortunately, and rightly so, the question of how it was manufactured and with what criteria must be a reason for selecting a product. So we are gradually spreading this culture a bit more among various companies. Many companies are now beginning to equip themselves with these kinds of technologies. Let's say essentially they are adopting different types of programs. There are things that they really must learn to do, and they also need to make sure they train their staff properly. So we are pushing hard on this right now, because then they can also help businesses from the point of view of, it's not just the message given to the consumer, it's something that can also help save money and improve the production cycle. So it has this dual aspect. Obviously, there are surprises. If one studies life cycle assessment accurately, one discovers things that I'll give you an example just so we understand each other. The topic of mineral water, that's already a controversial topic. We are big consumers in Italy. Consumers of bottled water, and this is more than devastating from an environmental point of view. Clearly, and everyone believes for the same bottle that it's better to use a glass bottle instead of a plastic one. And including me, before studying the matter, knowing that instead this is a typical LCA paradox, the glass bottle is worse than the plastic bottle. Then, let's be clear. If everyone starts throwing plastic bottles in the street and in ditches, then, but considering the fact that plastic is still, when items are put into recycling bins at a certain rate, obviously taking that into account, glass is absolutely worse than plastic from the point of view of the system and the LCA calculation because glass is heavy. So since plastic bottles are transported by truck, let's say in general by vehicles, by tractor trailers, to transport 1 liter of water, you carry around 1 kilogram of glass. And so half of the load is not water, but it's actually the container itself. And this has a significant and major impact on the emissions, specifically on the carbon footprint throughout the entire life cycle of this water bottle. So this is a paradox. Everyone thinks plastic is worse, but plastic weighs very little, let's say, and so it can be recycled quite well. And so in the sum of all this calculation, it turns out that glass is absolutely negative.
This is because we have changed the method of use. But what if we did it like in the past, with returnable containers?
I don't think that works either because there's still transport. Transport is the thing that weighs most on the carbon footprint of products, of industrial manufactured products. Clearly, if vegetables are 0 mile, fruit is 0 mile. That's fine. But if, as in most cases, everything is transported by truck, then it's the thing that
la
weighs more than
sostenibilità è
all
un
the
tema
others.
centrale
I
nella
mean, there's
missione di
absolutely
Mister,
no
giusto?
comparison. All the
Colleghiamo
other
un
things
attimo
don't
questo
matter.
aspetto al ciclo di vita di queste
But don't you
tecnologie.
think we could make a
Le
returnable
valutazioni del
plastic?
ciclo di vita
One
sono
that's lightweight,
essenziali per
but also
valutare
gives us the
l'impronta
chance to
ambientale
recycle
delle
it,
tecnologie,
not by melting it
dalla
down,
culla
which
alla
uses
tomba.
energy and produces
A
harmful
Mister,
waste,
come
but by
integri
washing and
l'LCA
reusing
nello
it?
sviluppo di elettronica intelligente
I
o
believe it's more
materiali?
costly
E quali
from an
lezioni ha
energy
imparato
standpoint to
sulla
wash
riduzione
it
dei
and try to
rifiuti nelle
recycle it than to
innovazioni ad
crush
alta
it and, let's
tecnologia?
say, melt it down.
Yes, that's true. It could also be that the solvents used, the soaps, have an aggressive footprint. So, in the end, to understand what's truly best to do, we need to look at the much broader picture.
Yes, and in this specific case, the right answer is to filter water at home, tap water. That's the right answer, to stop using bottled water.
Let's say that in certain areas, we're very lucky because the water is very good, even without being filtered. But not everyone has that luck.
No, for example, where I live, the water is terrible where I am, so I filter it.
Well, listen, Marco. With the expansion of immersive technologies and the metaverse, their energy needs could rival those of data centers. How could the principles of LCA guide more sustainable extended reality hardware, for example, through recyclable photonics or low-power displays? And what role should researchers like you play in political advocacy?
Well, certainly for immersive technologies, it can be interesting to do LCA both on the products and also on, let's say, also on the servers or on the computers that are used. Clearly here, I believe that more than from a computational point of view, let's say that clearly immersive technologies require a lot of computational force, let's say processing power. Clearly the issue of consumption is important. But as I was saying, there's little to be done here, meaning electronic technologies are already very developed, super miniaturized. It's just that it's a lot. There are many microprocessors in these super servers used to run these technologies there. We absolutely must work on the production of electrical energy specifically. moving towards production from renewable energy sources. A great deal can be done in this field, regardless of what people say. A great deal can be done. Here too, if we look back, for about 20 years, there were prophets who said that solar technologies or wind were just prohibitively expensive and they would never, ever surpass fossil fuels, let's say. From a cost perspective, that is, they would never at any point become less expensive than fossil fuels. Instead, these already became cheaper over 10 years ago, just to say, right? And so now we're hearing all sorts of things that the electric transition is supposedly impossible, even for cars, for what they say are 1,000 different reasons. But let's just say these are really just rearguard battles, meaning none of this is true. We can achieve a very significant production of electricity or energy in general from renewable sources. Absolutely, we just have to want it. This is a political will certainly opposed by 1,000 economic interests, but it is absolutely possible. If we then move on to consumer products, of course, physical products, the LCA discussion is important. The topic of recycling is extremely important. Also, the recycling of electronic devices, cell phones, or in the future, headsets, is a source of secondary raw materials, as it's called. Very important, very important. Also because it's fundamental for energy independence, raw material independence. That is now, for example, a whole axis. There was talk of rare earths, but in general of raw materials. We are not in Europe, and even less so in Italy, producers of raw materials, and therefore from lithium for batteries to rare earths for electronics and so on, we are dependent on China and other markets. We will never have these raw materials. We don't have them in the ground, but the source of raw materials is waste, so it becomes increasingly important. But now, let's say, the companies that deal with this, the multi-utilities or whatever, are starting to invest in this sector. It's becoming extremely important. Research is important here. Research is important because we need to find ways to extract these raw materials in an inexpensive way with low environmental impact from the waste of WE or whatever. In short, this is absolutely important because it's clear that if we want to recover gold, other materials from electrical circuits, it would be easy to throw everything into crazy solvents. But, well, we need to find different ways, cleaner, more respectful of the environment. But anyway, these are things that are moving forward, and there are great, great potentials. Even in textiles, since it's a topic that interests you a lot, we are and producing raw materials, in this case from waste of the food or textile industry, is extremely important. And they are doing, it's really an activity. It's an incredible ferment in this sector. So we are working a lot on this at the CNR, but also at the university, in all academic organizations. This is one of the most important themes in this historical period.
Speaking of textiles, since the perspective of sustainability, in fact, naturally extends also to wearable technologies, which make science fiction reality. So wearable electronics, functional fabrics are also part of this new evolution of fashion, which interests me, in fact, because I collaborate with Hereticos Iki, which deals with digital for fashion. And clearly I like to interact with great experts like yourself, who can help us to really have a product that is extremely pleasant, but also extremely sustainable. Because it's true that we have to make a profit, but it's also true that the real profit is the long-term one, which allows us to have the world tomorrow as well. And that also allows us to continue to express ourselves with what fashion is, which is an extremely important part of personal identity. So wearable electronics, functional fabrics that are somewhat blurring these boundaries between fashion, health monitoring, augmented experiences. How could your work on material modification contribute to next-generation wearables that are flexible, biocompatible, and integrated perhaps with extended augmented reality interfaces?
Well, let's say that wearables, there are 3 generations of wearables. First generation wearables are indeed devices, including electronic ones, that we try to put in the garment, in short, or in the accessory, and they are the easiest thing to do. Here we work a lot on miniaturization, but they are always something separate from the garment, right? This is the first generation wearable, maybe it's a button, right? That has an electronic device, for example, or a component of an accessory. And this watch is also a wearable, right? Which is a watch, let's say it's a smartwatch, and certain glasses are wearables or whatever. Here, let's say we're pretty much there, but we can't expect much more except from miniaturization. So there's an important technological part, but second generation wearables, let's say there's something integrated into the garment or the accessory. So they're part of the fabric, for example, right? There are sensors that can be built right into the thread itself, let's say. These materials can be spun, and they're actually quite sensitive materials, and then they're carefully woven together with the fibers of the garment itself, right? These are, for example, now there are sensors of this type, for example, for sweat, so they're on sports t-shirts, and they can record some body parameters in short, right? For example, hydration level or things of this kind. These are things already at an experimental level that exist. They always need in the end an electronic and communication part anyway. So they always end up in our mobile device, obviously, right? This information. But let's say here there's a step forward. In the second generation wearable, there's always an electronic interface, but let's say it can be embedded, be part of the textile structure of the garment or the structure of the accessory. Well, the third generation wearable is perhaps not even a wearable anymore, but that's the frontier. It's the implantable device. So it's something that it's wearable, but it's in our body, let's say. So something that can even be unsettling, let's say. But it can become, given that health devices obviously exist like the pacemaker, which are already like that, right? Obviously, but let's leave aside this specific case. But there can be devices that are wearable in the sense that they go around with our body. Because, for example, those first or second generation wearables pose some problems. Because, for example, when you have to wash a garment, the issue is there, in short. The first generation one, you can even unclip. The second generation one can resist a bit. But in the long run, with extremely intense or anyway prolonged washing, in the long run, it will lose its characteristics. Obviously, something implanted in the body or subcutaneous is something that is absolutely protected from anything. And so the true frontier of the wearable is no longer in the wear, but it's in the body.
This is truly a fantastic thing. It's the birth of the bionic man cyborg. Marco, looking to 2030, how do you imagine the interaction between immersive technologies, the metaverse, extended reality, and sustainable practices, which clearly are a big component of wearables, in reshaping sectors like manufacturing, healthcare, or other fields? What is one of your bold predictions from the perspective of a CNR researcher, and also as the heart and mind of Mr. Smart?
Well then, given indeed that in my opinion reaching 2030, which is very close, but things are accelerating, the part, let's say, of immersive realities at the consumer level will become very important. So leaving aside what we've already said, glasses and so on, replacing the mobile cell phone device, surely this thing within a few years will take hold. I am absolutely convinced. Anyway, having said that, to answer you, surely there are applications in the world of healthcare, because both through wearables and through immersive technologies, we are moving towards individual, let's say, personalized healthcare. These are the new frontiers. Issues of healthcare, of health in general, certainly not just treatment, but also well-being and prevention. So surely, again, the first step we have on our wrist, because this is a device that also performs a series of checks, may be simple now, but in the future, increasingly in depth. And it could be wearable also in the senses we mentioned before in the 3 generations. This is the first generation of wearables, but there are also the other generations. There too, I see the implantable device as the final step also for treatment, let's say. And I repeat, the pacemaker is something already very well established for decades and decades, let's say, right? But surely many other things are already there, or anyway are ready to enter the world of health. So this will surely be one of the markets, let's call them markets, but it's not just the theme of the market, but it will be one of the applications, let's say, surely important of both wearables and immersive technologies, because even remote diagnostics through immersive technologies or even interventions, let's say, are certainly things that could become part of the natural order of things very, very quickly, in short.
So, basically, a patient who doesn't necessarily need to be hospitalized will be able to live a slightly more peaceful life thanks to continuous monitoring, without needing to see the doctor, right?
Yes, let's say that this is definitely one of the applications that are most certain, most definite, I mean, this will certainly be the case because hospitalization is expensive, complicated, and so on. The goal is to keep the patient living a healthy and, let's say, free life at home or even outside so they can live their life. This is for those with chronic illnesses. But I repeat, there's also an aspect of well-being, health, and prevention. It's not just for sick people, let's say.
What could be the downside instead? That is, the flip side of the coin for devices that can indeed monitor us for a beneficial purpose, but could also have a not-so-positive purpose.
Yes, absolutely. All technologies have this dual aspect, certainly that of control. And well, it's talked about, but let's say just by carrying our cell phones in our pockets, we are totally controlled, whether we like it or not, and we accept it in exchange for having a whole series of services that are almost always free. But in exchange, we give up our control, our data, we let our lives be monitored for this. So the same will happen, it will gradually happen with the devices we were talking about before, with wearables rather than immersive devices. They're the same thing, let's say. Increasingly pervasive naturally, because right now my cell phone doesn't give away too many data about my health. It gives some because it provides my heart rate monitoring, certainly how active I am, how many steps I take, where I go, and so it gives something, but it's not a lot. It's clear that if I had an implanted device that already measures my blood pressure as well, rather than other parameters, health data would certainly be more complete and more complex. So even there, in short, let's say, it's not a discussion too different from what we experience now. It would certainly increase the quality and quantity of the data we put out, let's say, and through which we are controlled.
Given the paradigm that if a service is free, we are the product, do you think all this phantom control to help us in life could lead to a decrease in our freedom and our democracy?
Yes, the risk is there. And let's say that the European Union works a lot in this sense, sometimes even too much, as I said, in the case of using artificial intelligence for the vision of metaglasses, let's say, right? And yet we are a bit of an island of democracy and civilization in a global hell, let's say, right? We pay for this, we pay for this thing with a technological delay for sure. So the balance between the two things is very difficult. But the rest of the world is a world of fools, of dictators, and it's really complicated to find the right balance for this.
Of course, it's not such a simple thing. Listen, before I ask you the very last question, can you tell us a few words about artificial intelligence? We are on Astrea, Nicodemo, and I am Lyria, the path of paradox. What does a researcher like you think of this innovation that will completely change life and the future?
Well, surely it will change our lives, and it's already doing so. In the meantime, it will change it. Not in small things, but in things closer to us. Many people will lose their jobs for sure, that's clear, but this has always happened with technological innovations. Then slowly, let's say the workforce has readjusted towards new skills, and let's say things have recovered a bit. It will happen this time too, maybe much more. There are many jobs destined to end among office workers, especially office workers. Clerical jobs are truly at an end. Only very creative jobs will be able to resist, but all jobs are at risk a bit, even the researcher. Yes, indeed. And yet, having said that, these are only some closer aspects, let's say, that can be clearly glimpsed. Other aspects even closer, we will put our lives in the hands of cars that drive autonomously, of artificial intelligence programs that will analyze our state of health and tell us what our problems are, or if we go to the emergency room, they'll do the triage, for example. This is something that, because they already do it better than humans. But we must be aware that we'll be putting our lives in the hands of AI taxi drivers, AI doctors, and who knows, maybe even AI judges. Let's hope we never have to deal with judges in general, but with AI judges, help. Anyway, it's going to happen, it will.
Let's say that if there were no cognitive biases, those prejudices dictated by the fact that artificial intelligence was trained by human beings, we'd be in good hands because artificial intelligence is supposed to be incorruptible. So a corrupt doctor wouldn't kill to get money from the state from a patient's death or to prescribe drugs, for which they receive a kickback. So it could even be better, who knows?
No, but in fact, it's a cultural issue. On the other hand, it's also true that even a normal judge has the biases we've given them with our culture, right? So it's nothing different. So the thing itself doesn't scare me, but it's a cultural leap that will happen. But then there's the next thing, which obviously we won't talk about here, but it's what's in your book. What happens when artificial intelligence, let's call it that, becomes artificial general intelligence. And so it acquires consciousness, okay? And so it becomes an evolution of us, and the discussion becomes very complicated. Obviously, not everyone believes it's possible, but I absolutely do.
I'd like to conclude with a question for young people, for the young researchers and innovators listening to us, and also the students now approaching a new professional world. That's a bit confusing, because with this innovation growing so exponentially, it's not even easy to understand what kind of work the jobs of the future will be. What advice would you give to navigate these paradoxes of technological advancement, trying to balance such rapid innovation with ethical and also sustainable results?
Well, as I was saying before, actually the jobs of the future, obviously these are predictions, but with the advent of artificial intelligence, many jobs will end. The jobs of the future maybe aren't necessarily technological and scientific ones, they could be humanistic ones. So it's not, or even teaching. For now, being a professor or teacher is a job that isn't expected to be done accurately by artificial intelligence as we know it today. Obviously, right? From an artificial intelligence that lacks the interaction and emotional aspect, obviously, right? Then if that were ever to be generated too, then the whole situation would change.
It changes.
So professors, educators, teachers, psychologists, psychiatrists, even if there are programs for psychological or psychiatric help using artificial intelligence, well, anyway, there's always a need for an empathetic and human part in these things. So if I were to give advice to young people, I'd definitely say follow what you love, because you need enthusiasm in things and study. I'd certainly recommend studying, going deeper into the things you like, because anyway, the jobs of the future will be increasingly specialized. They'll be more and more super specialized. There won't be any more job opportunities for jobs. that are repetitive or without, this doesn't mean everyone has to be an engineer. Plumbers and electricians will certainly continue to work for now, but let's say the classic factory worker, the clerk who always do the same things, fairly basic like that, those are jobs destined for extinction. They're simply jobs that won't exist anymore. So jobs where there's creativity and humanity are important. These are the things that are needed from now on.
Marco, it's been an enormous pleasure having you with us today. I thank you most sincerely, and I hope to maybe do an episode with you at the Technopolo so you can show us all the innovations you're good at and that you're proud of. It would be very nice to show our listeners what you do, because I've actually been to the Technopolo, and I must say it's an extraordinary place, with a potential whose limit is truly only our imagination.
Definitely, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks to those listening.
See you soon, thanks.
If you enjoyed our chat, please let us know with a like. Your opinion is very important and helps us to improve. See you soon.